Welcome to Fresh Off the Boat. I'm delighted to be chatting with Rishi Olakal. He went to Anglo-Chinese school in Singapore and then pursued computer science at Yale NUS. I remember visiting campus and meeting you there. At that time, you were also recruiting, so it was
Yeah.
fun to get your resume in your first year. But that went off well, actually. We went on to work with several kids in Singapore and Southeast Asia. But more about work I do a little later, because the conversation I want to have with you is about your experience at Yale and US, and having experienced Singapore, life in Singapore for a few years at Anglo-Chinese. How did you transition into campus when you started 2014, right? So
2012, I think. I
2012.
I
Okay,
forget.
great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So tell us how were the early days at Yale and US? What did you do?
So
What did you
the
like?
so the interesting thing for me though is that despite having done high school and then college in Singapore, I didn't migrate all that far in Singapore, which is already pretty small, right? Because the college, the campus is right down the road. It's about a 5 minute walk from where I went to high school. So it's right next door. You move right in, and you already know the lay of the land, and you know where everything is, and you just sort of move straight in. But it just went as smoothly as it could. It was a new campus. It was the newest campus in the NUS, and it still is, I think. It was in a sort of a newly built, a larger campus of NUS as well. So all of the facilities were top notch, and the people were good. So yeah, it was a pretty easy move in.
But obviously, the academics and the curriculum, Yale and US was also pioneering in a way to try new things out. How is it like being in the first few batches of Yale and US, and not just right in the beginning, settling in the academics, but also overall as a 4-year experience?
Fair. So that's okay. So that is something with a very kind of a long answer, right? The first part of it is definitely that the mindset that they started the college with and the way that they came into it was way more American than Asian, right? So it was way more Yale than NUS, and not even Yale. Maybe some of the more newer colleges. The way that the curriculum was designed. For I was one of the few people that came from Singapore or came from a Singaporean educational system that didn't find as much of had as much trouble adjusting because I came from IB and comparing to IB, it was close enough that that transition was pretty easy. Now, the first 2 years, or the first two batches, I think had some of the best experiences the college had to offer because it was a very startup school mindset, right? You could create your own courses. A lot of us did. You could ask for new facilities. A lot of us did. I think one of the things was we ended up getting a $5 million fabrication lab built simply because five of us at the college at the time wanted it. So they had a lot of budget that they were trying to allocate into different ways of learning. But what was great was that they allowed the students to be a part of that as well. So I think for the first three batches, I think had the time of their lives, just sort of designing the things that they wanted to learn and sort of having that be realized. Now I think it's a lot more fixed.
So it's a liberal arts school, and here you are. You wanted to do a computer
Yeah.
science major. Did you go decided? And how did that decision pan out? Because the gen ed requirements would be fairly rigorous and sort of demanding. Do you think it worked for you in some ways, or you would want it otherwise?
I think it was one of the personally, I think it was one of the best calls I've made because the best thing about Yale NUS was that it also gave you access to the resources of NUS computing and also Yale Computer Lab and the rest of it. So it wasn't lacking for depth if you went looking for it. But at the same time, I had done about a year at NUS Computing before as a research fellow and a little bit of research there. And to me, it felt very sort of one-sided, the curriculum and sort of how connected it was. So coming out of Yale NUS, I think having additional training that is in the liberal arts, in philosophy or how to speak or how to write things, definitely helped me. And I know it helped a lot of other people because I've spoken to employers who have actively preferred hiring from liberal arts colleges that do computer science or things like that because they're just way easier to talk to people that come out of these things.
So if you would remember one or two or three classes that were non-STEM and you loved them, which ones would they be?
Oh, I definitely did. So we all had to do about 12 to 15 that were non-STEM, and I think I did about 20. The ones that I remember sort of very vividly were a couple of ones that that covered, a deep history that went into sort of medieval history, things like that. And a couple of the other ones that were also very focused on writing. They were very focused on trying to build a narrative out of whether that was history or that was politics or sort of global affairs, trying to build your own narrative and sort of your own arguments. I think that definitely helped.
So we are living in historic times, to say the least. So you probably have some ways to reflect on that. Do you think, I'm switching gears a little bit, but talking about your work currently in technology, what opportunities does this historic moment have? And also, maybe a longer answer would be, what exactly do question is, what exactly do you really do right now?
Right.
And how do you see the world and the need for tech?
Got it. So I'll try and segment that as well as I can. The company that I'm currently working for, we've been around for about a year and a half, and we were working on sort of risk assessment and sort of analysis for maritime. So for vessels, we're analyzing the routes that those vessels are on. When the current situation that we're in hit, sort of everything changed for everybody, especially for maritime. Now, what that meant was we live in a world with sort of large globalized trade routes, and those sort of rely on people being able to move really freely, items being able to move really freely, vessels being able to move freely. And if one or two parts of those break down, that's already a bad day because nothing gets through. Now, everything was starting to break down. Countries were completely closing their borders and not allowing people to get off and on the vessels. Vessels didn't know where to go, and they were just starting to pile up. Meanwhile, they had to still move their cargo and at the same time feed the people that are on these vessels. So we sort of redirected a large part of our resources to solving that problem. And I think that's how it's impacted my life and sort of our lives the most, in that there was also a huge opportunity in that. Because the current situation is that you've got about 1 million to about 1.5 million people, individuals stuck on vessels off the coast of different countries. And it's turning into a humanitarian crisis.
Yeah, it's definitely something which no one expected.
Yeah.
And hearing from you about shipping and maritime, not just cargo, but people movement is something I had not thought of. There's so many logistical issues to look at. How do you apply computer science in your job at this company? And what is it that your training really was about? So there are two parts of the question again. How do you figure out what you learned, and then gradually, how did you apply it in your current job?
Okay, so a lot of the training that I had in early college, I have to say, doesn't really apply to industry as often happens in STEM fields, right? Education and sort of the standard syllabuses are pretty far behind where industry really is. But thankfully, the couple of the work that I did while I was in college and some of the courses from NUS especially helped sort of transition into what the work that I'm doing now and the work that I've done right before that. And what we do effectively is to aggregate data at large scales and then run algorithms on it to find paths so that things can keep moving. So if you've got 200 countries that have completely different immigration restrictions, visa restrictions, travel restrictions, and you've got about 5,000 to 6,000 vessels with different combinations of people on board and different routes that they've got to get their cargo through, you look at all that data and then you try and figure out, okay, how do you route this vessel so that the people on there can get off and new people can get on and the cargo gets where it needs to go? And that's a really complex problem that's hard for a human being to solve, but that's where tech really shines.
So it's a bit like operations research,
yeah,
data science, a lot of data science, of course. So when you look at computer science and education in college, there are students who do specializations. Like one, of course, is ML, AI, data science. The other could be web app, UX, UI. There could be many others, embedded systems. So at Yale NUS, did you see that same depth and resources being available to tinker with different things within tech?
So I would say that depth existed when it came to ML and AI, right? Especially because we were living through one of the biggest deep tech booms, especially in Singapore, that the entire country was going through. So a lot of resources went into crafting good machine learning sort of AI courses. and providing students with that sort of deep depth of understanding. The other side of things, though, I have to say I'm yet to find a university curriculum, and I've done the Yale one, and I've done the NUS one, I've done the Yale NUS one, that even sufficiently approaches industry in sort of standard product building, right? How do you consider the design of the product and the rest of it? But ML AI, I think they covered it.
So do you think organizations like General Assembly, Flatiron, and other academies which have mushroomed, which give industry-specific full-stack engineering training, do a better job for people who would want to just get a job?
Okay, I think that's so I've got very mixed feelings. I've hired people from both An Academy and General Assembly. There's one in Singapore as well, and I think it is a step in the right direction for a lot of these things. But personally, and this is my opinion only, I think they churn people out way too fast, right? I think there's not enough time to get enough breadth or enough time for that information to sink in or enough time to really understand that information before you are pushed out. So that is also the problem. And the other part of it is I've ended up preferring university graduates, and I think I'm preferred in a lot of ways as a university graduate because you learn how to learn. If you spend the 4 years right or the 3 years right, you learn how to learn, and then you do that.
So your current role is a CTO. It's like a C-suite job, and it's not just about being an engineer. What do you think are your 3 strengths, and in the current role that you have of leadership in a company which does tech?
Okay. So that's a really big one. I'll give you one, and then you're gonna have to prod me to get the rest of it. So I'd say that I found myself able to communicate really well when it comes to sort of an impedance or communication bandwidth mismatch between different people. Because previous jobs and also having gone to Yale NUS, which was just very multicultural, I've had to work with people, and myself included, where English wasn't always the first language. It's people that speak differently. The cultures and the way that things are expressed to you are very, very, very different. So I've worked with PRCs, or worked with people from India of different cultures. And I think that's definitely come in handy.
Right. So also, I'm going to ask you a few questions about how the future of education might look like in your head. You've had a in-campus, in-person sort of experience, and now the world seems to have gone upside down. So for students coming in or currently in college, what do you think tech could do to solve part of what's going on?
So I think tech definitely already, we would be in a much bigger hole without tech, that's for sure, right? Without just sort of the easy video conferencing and just the way that you can reach people, we would be in a much bigger problem. But if this continues, if this is where it goes, then I'd also see that your organizations that accept students or sort of new grads will have to pick up a lot of the slack in sort of training people to work within groups, training people to communicate better. And there's a lot of soft skills that you pick up in college or in high school, where you go to with a lot of people in person, that you have to negotiate things in a room. I think those will still be relevant moving on, unless you're joining a completely digital company like GitHub or something, and you never actually sit in a room with the people that hired you or work for you. I think companies are going to end up having to pick up a lot of that slack to train people.
Super. So I know the ecosystem in Singapore, it really promotes tech startups and overall jobs. We've seen students who've been earnest get jobs quite easily in Singapore. What is it like, and where do you see, is it changing on the ground? Is there a slowdown in the economy, or things are as good for the kids who graduated this year?
So I'll give you the somewhat in-depth answer there, right? What I'm seeing around me and what a lot of other people are seeing around me is that it hasn't been a slowdown just yet, right? Because US markets have kept strong enough, that means that a lot of the leverage and a lot of the capital in the markets is still moving. So a lot of companies that got funded, I still have their funding. None of that has been pulled, right? A lot of the other companies that got funded, there are clients to these companies, so money is still moving, right? In fact, I know way too many companies that are actually hiring in this because a lot of people are getting laid off from other parts of the world. But the one thing that they all have in common, the people that at least that I speak to, is that they expect the other shoe to drop sometime in the next 7 to 8 months. Right? Once that capital run drops off and the markets actually go into free fall, if they do, then you're going to start seeing problems. But so far, it's over here. It's been business as usual.
That's interesting to note. Yeah, I think Singapore has been kind of a front runner in developing a service economy.
Yeah.
And our students, in fact, my next interview is also a student who is currently in ESSEC Business School. So it'll be a fun Singapore afternoon for me. So, yeah, all of this is possible virtually. And on our channel, we are trying to sort of also make sure that we have these videos indexed so
Yeah.
that people can search for the right information and ignore my rambling from time to time.
Oh, no
But of
worries.
course, these are, yeah. So tech makes it all possible, and it's just fascinating how COVID has made us rethink even a simple thing like a counseling company. What do you think have been your reflections during this time of lockdown?
I mean, I started out as a developer, right? So that part of me is perfectly all right, not having enough human contact and just working away, especially because these have been the busiest 4 weeks of my life, just trying to get things going in under new circumstances. The rest of it is, I mean, you do miss the way that the world or a small kind of country like Singapore used to come together, and you get really good at talking to screens, right?
Right. So what inspiration do you draw? Do you read? Do you follow YouTube channels? Do you listen to podcasts? If you could name 2, 3 things, authors, books, podcasts, YouTube channels, whatever,
So
blogs.
I read a whole bunch of science fiction. Haven't in a while. Well, haven't since this started. There's a bunch of YouTube channels on just sort of people making things or doing things that I watch.
Which
And
ones?
okay, so the one that comes to mind immediately is the one called This Old Tony, and it's just a decently done channel, at least in my opinion. In that he makes things that it's decently presented.
Great.
Another one would be Tom Scott, and I think he's a lot more mainstream, but there's also a lot of good information there.
Fine. The other thing, for students who would be applying to Yale NUS in the future, and I think many more from India will
Yeah.
apply given its proximity to the country. What do you think makes a good Yale NUS applicant? In your mind, have you thought about it? I'm sure many people would pose this question to you.
Okay, so I can tell you that this is something that used to come up a lot while I was in college. And at the time, I would say that the ideal Yale NUS applicant would be someone that most of the time, most of the people that ended up at Yale NUS, if you're filtering by that, were third culture kids, right? So people that probably moved around a bunch, so are understanding of different cultures, and that comes across, are kind of more all-rounded than a lot more spiky, a lot more in really good at one thing kind of students, kind of jack of all people that ended up at Yale NUS. I have to qualify it by saying that I've been hearing from recent grads or recent entrants that profile has changed quite a bit, but I am unsure in which direction.
And as far as what do you think they found in your candidature or in your essay, what do you think worked
Sorry?
in your application? What do you think worked in your application? Your essay or some extracurricular or some preparation in high school that really
Honestly,
showed that you had a spike?
Honestly, I am not sure. It might be that a large like a large batch of my friends from different schools around Singapore all ended up at Yale NUS. So I knew about 20 to 30 people from the first batch before I even interviewed, and I think that might have affected things.
So it's not about figuring out what and how they're constructing a class, the leadership,
Yeah.
pool of students, or the kids who get the highest GPA or the SAT scores.
Okay,
or have great personal
I
stories.
think I think now it is that way because it's everything's formed a lot more. There is a proper admissions department that takes care of things a lot more. But in the first 2 to 3 batches, it was a lot more who knew who, and it was people were allowed to use their gut a lot more in who got in and who didn't, because they were trying to just build a class that was kind of representative of what the people there would like. Now I think it's a lot more firm, and they've got more stronger guidelines, is what I understand.
Okay, now we're going to move to the last segment of our podcast, and this is rapid fire. So,
Okay.
if you were to think of any embarrassing moment, failure, or mistake in your life, and what were the reflections from that during college or at work?
I think one of the more embarrassing moments of my life was my the first ever internship that I applied for. Right, it was just like a perfect storm of things happened that day because I had an interview set up with them, and my phone dies, and then I put the SIM in something else, and then that dies as well, and I couldn't get a cab. It was raining. I ended up getting in a cab, and I ended up sort of 20 minutes late. Right, I get there, I profusely apologize to the person for a good 5 minutes, and then he leads me into a room, and then we have a little bit of chat, and then we talk to him, and I just keep getting hit with these really hard questions, and I leave, and obviously I didn't get it, and I find out later that I apologized to the wrong person. Right, so the person that I was meeting with, which was the CEO of this robotics company in Singapore, was just beyond livid that I showed up that late and did not spend enough time apologizing. Yeah, it's one of those things that you think about and you're just gonna be embarrassed about it for the rest of your life.
That's great learning. So, if you were to give some advice to students who are in high school or at college, uh, and this could be general advice about dealing with failures or uncertainty, especially now dealing with uncertainty.
Yeah.
What do you think, reflecting back on your experiences, and I'm sure there are many times when it was not all hunky-dory and you were not just CTO at a tech company. So yeah, what do you think worked for you in those lows or times of failure, or and what you advise in general people should do?
Okay, so because this is advice, because this is general, it's going to feel very fortune cookie. But something that's always helped me, and I think some of my proudest moments came from some of my darkest moments, which always came from looking at the problems that you have and realizing that if it's uncertain, if there's a lot of uncertainty, if it's a crisis, there's usually an opportunity in there somewhere. You know what I mean? There's usually something to be done differently in there somewhere. Any industry that you look at, if it's in crisis, then there are strong opportunities starting to happen. Most of the world's power and wealth and happiness, and a lot of the world was built in times of crisis. So I think that's something that keeps me going.
So with that optimism and simple message, I would say I'm going to wrap things up. Thank you, Rishi, for spending these 15, 20 minutes with
Yeah,
us.
no,
And I'm sure our audiences would love to get in touch with you. And if there are questions, I'll send them your way. We will also be doing panels where students who are interested in tech or even match
yeah.
them up with non-techies and artists and creatives, and look forward to inviting you to those sessions as well.
No worries.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been super fun.